The laughter started before he reached the door. Not warm laughter. Not the kind that fills a room with something good. The sharp kind. The kind with an edge. The kind that means someone, somewhere, has already decided how this ends. Chicago pressed itself against the windows of River North Rooftop, 40 floors up. All glass and amber light, and the indifferent beauty of a city that has seen everything and remembers nothing. Somewhere inside, a woman in a burgundy dress was sitting very still at a table by the window, her hands flat on the white cloth, her spine straight in the way that costs something to maintain. She had almost not come tonight. She had written 3 different reasons not to. Then the elevator doors opened. A man in a dark jacket stepped onto the floor, looked around the room, paused, just for half a step. Something crossed his face that the room had not expected. He kept walking. The laughter hit before Anthony Wilson even reached the table. Not the warm kind. Not the kind you hear at a good party when someone finally lands the punchline they've been building toward all night. This was the other kind. Would you treat them with kindness? The kind that lives in hallways and high school cafeterias and every place where someone decided another person's discomfort was the evening's entertainment. Anthony heard it the moment he stepped through the glass doors of River North Rooftop. Chicago's skyline pressed against the windows on 3 sides, all lit up and indifferent the way only a city can be. The host smiled and said his name back to him like a question. He nodded. She led him forward. And somewhere in the middle distance, past the white tablecloths and the candle arrangements, and the couples leaning into each other over wine lists, a pocket of laughter tightened, sharpened, pointed itself in a direction. He didn't know the direction yet. He would. 7 hours earlier, he had been standing in the break room of Callaway and Drake Engineering on the 14th floor of a building he had helped design, drinking coffee that had been sitting on the burner since morning. And Harold Reed had appeared in the doorway with the exact expression of a man who had already decided you were going to say yes before you opened your mouth. Hear me out. Anthony did not look up from his coffee. I'm serious. This one is different. You said that about the last one. The last one was different from the one before that. Harold. Anthony set his mug down. The one before that showed up 40 minutes late and spent the entire dinner telling me about her ex-husband's boat. This is not a boat situation. How do you know? Have you met her? Pause. The particular pause of a man who has not in fact met her. I know of her. That's not the same thing. Monica Bryant materialized behind Harold the way she always did, appearing without footsteps, holding a tablet against her chest like a shield, or maybe a weapon, her natural hair pulled back sharp and professional. Her whole presentation designed to communicate that she was the most organized person in any room she entered, which she usually was. That was never the issue with Monica. The issue was what she did with that organizational capacity when she aimed it at other people's lives. Her name is Vanessa, Monica said. She writes children's books. Has she published any? Another pause. A different flavor this time. She's working on it. Anthony looked at them both. Really looked. Harold had the phone in his hand, screen down, which meant there was something on that screen he didn't want Anthony to see. Monica was doing the thing where she smiled just slightly more than the situation required. The retail smile. The smile that meant a transaction was already in progress, and she was simply waiting for him to catch up. Something was off. He couldn't name it yet. He filed it away, and with kindness. He filed it away in the part of his brain that handled things he couldn't resolve immediately. The same drawer that held his father's voice and the structural flaw in the Wentworth project he'd spotted 3 weeks ago and hadn't told the client about yet. One dinner, Monica said. River North Rooftop. 7 o'clock. She slid a folded piece of paper across the counter with 2 fingers. We already made the reservation. You made a reservation. It's non-refundable. Anthony looked at the paper, looked at Harold, looked at Monica. The tell was that neither of them could hold eye contact for more than 2 seconds. But he wanted to believe they were telling the truth. He had been alone for 3 years, not in the dramatic way, not in the way that made people uncomfortable at dinner parties, but in the quiet, sustainable way that starts to feel like a personality trait if you let it go on long enough. 3 years since he and Denise had agreed, very reasonably and very painfully, that reasonable and painful was probably all they were ever going to be. Fine, he said. One dinner. Harold exhaled like he'd been holding it since Tuesday. Dress nice, Monica added, already turning to leave. She's already seen your LinkedIn photo. He should have caught that. That she had already seen his photo. That meant someone had already made contact. Already you treat them with kindness? Already shared his information, already set wheels in motion he hadn't agreed to. But he was thinking about what to wear, and whether he remembered how to make conversation with someone new, and the detail slipped through. It wouldn't slip through later. Across the city, in a third-floor apartment in Bronzeville, that smelled like turpentine and Earl Grey tea, and the particular dusty sweetness of old paperbacks, Vanessa Carter was standing in front of her bathroom mirror in a dress she'd already taken off twice. The first dress was too much. The second one felt like she was trying to disappear. This third one, the deep burgundy with the wrap front, was the one Stephanie had pulled out of the closet 20 minutes ago and held up with the absolute certainty of someone who had never once doubted her own eye. That one, Stephanie had said. It's too… Mom, I was going to say formal. You were going to say something about your body. Vanessa had not answered, which was its own kind of answer. Stephanie Harris was 19 years old and studying communications at DePaul and had inherited her grandmother's ability to say the thing that made the room go quiet. Not cruel, just precise. The kind of precise that comes from paying close attention to the person you love most and noticing the patterns they think they're hiding. Vanessa looked at herself in the mirror now. She turned sideways, turned back. The dress was not too formal. The dress was fine. The dress was more than fine. That wasn't the problem. Would you treat them with kindness? The problem was the voice in her head that had been running on a loop for about 7 years and still hadn't gotten the memo that the marriage was over. The voice that sounded like her ex-husband, Marcus's voice, even though she hadn't heard his actual voice in 2 years and had no interest in hearing it again. The voice that counted things, measured things, assessed the gap between what she was and what it had decided she was supposed to be. She had almost texted the woman back, Rachel, the mutual friend of a mutual friend who had sent the original message, and said something polite and final. She'd typed 3 different with kindness. She'd typed 3 different versions of. But Stephanie had been sitting at the kitchen table working on a paper about media framing and had looked up at exactly the wrong moment and seen the expression on her mother's face. What happened? Nothing. Mom, someone wants me to go on a blind date. Stephanie had put down her pen. Full stop. Put it down flat and looked at Vanessa with the kind of attention that made Vanessa feel simultaneously loved and cornered. Are you going? I don't think so. Why? And Vanessa had looked at her daughter and tried to find an answer that wasn't the real answer. That wasn't because what if he looks at me the way Marcus used to look at me when I ordered dessert, and she couldn't find one. So she said nothing. And Stephanie, who knew what the silence meant better than Vanessa wanted her to, said, "You always write about characters who are brave enough to walk through the door. You've never once let me see you do it." It wasn't an accusation. That was the thing about Stephanie. She didn't accuse. She just stated. She just held up the mirror and waited. Vanessa had deleted the version of no and typed 4 words and sent them before she could think herself out of it. Okay, I'll be there. Would you treat them with kindness? She had stood in the kitchen afterward with her phone pressed against her sternum and whispered something she hadn't said out loud in years. Just let him be decent. That was all she was asking. Not charming. Not perfect. Just decent enough that she didn't have to spend the cab ride home cataloging everything she'd gotten wrong. Now she was in the burgundy dress, with her hair pinned up on one side, the way her grandmother used to pin her own hair before church, and she looked, she thought, like herself, which was either enough or it wasn't. And she had decided, somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd dress changes, that she was done making that calculation tonight. The restaurant was on the 40th floor. She arrived at 6:50 and was led to a table by the window, and the whole city opened up beneath her like a secret that had been there all along. She sat down. She ordered sparkling water. She put her hands flat on the white tablecloth and told herself to breathe. And then she heard the laughter from across the room. and her hands stopped being flat. 3 tables away, a group of 4, 2 men and a woman and a second woman, who arrived late and slid in beside the first. One of the men, the one with the phone already in his hand, angled himself toward Vanessa's table. Not obviously, practiced. The way people angle themselves when they want to be sure they have the right sight line. Vanessa's stomach understood before her brain did. She looked down at the kindness. The camel tablecloth, the candle between the centerpiece flowers threw warm light across the white cloth, and she focused on that. The warmth. Just the warmth. She was good at this, at finding the small thing to look at when the large thing was too much. It was a skill she had developed young and refined in the years of her marriage, and it had served her in small ways and failed her in large ones. The restaurant doors opened. She knew because the air shifted. The ambient sound of the room changed by a fraction. She didn't look up right away. She counted 3 seconds, the way her therapist had suggested for moments of acute self-consciousness, and then she lifted her eyes. Would you treat them with kindness? Anthony Wilson was following the hostess across the restaurant, and he walked the way men walk when they have spent enough time on construction sites that they've stopped thinking about how they take up space. Not swaggering, just present, completely present in his body in the room, in the particular night of it. Would you treat them with kindness? He wore a dark jacket over a lighter shirt, and he was looking around the restaurant with the same quiet attention she'd noticed. People gave places they were seeing for the first time, cataloging details, noting exits, assessing. He hadn't seen her yet, but she saw him stop, just for half a step, a barely there pause that most people wouldn't have caught. His gaze moved to the corner table where the group was sitting, stayed there 1 second too long, then moved on. His expression when he found her was not the expression she had spent the cab ride bracing for. She had been bracing for a specific face. She had seen it before. She had spent years learning to read it before it fully formed. The microscopic recalibration, the moment the eyes adjusted to information the brain hadn't finished processing. She knew how to watch for it, and she knew how to pretend she hadn't seen it when it came. It didn't come. Anthony Wilson looked at her, and his face did something she wasn't prepared for. It softened. She stood because she didn't know what else to do with the moment. Her chair scraped back slightly. Her hand knocked the edge of the water glass, and she grabbed it before anything spilled, and she thought, standing there with both hands now occupied, one gripping a glass and one gripping nothing, that she must look absolutely ridiculous. Vanessa. His voice was even, not performing ease, just actually easy. Anthony. She set the glass down. I wasn't sure. She stopped. She had about 5 different endings for that sentence, and none of them were ones she wanted to say out loud. He reached out his hand. She looked at it for 1 beat longer than was probably graceful. Then she shook it. His grip was firm, but not the performed firmness of men who have opinions about handshakes. Just a handshake, warm and brief and human. It's really good to meet you, he said. She searched his face for the recalibration, for the micro-adjustment, for the thing that would tell her she'd been right to write 3 different versions of no, nothing. You too, she heard herself say, and meant it, which surprised her. He pulled out her chair not with flourish, with the offhand competence of someone who does things because they make sense rather than because they're being observed. She sat. He sat. The waiter appeared from nowhere, the way good waiters do. Like they've been there all along and you just noticed them. Can I start you both with something to drink? Vanessa looked at the menu. Whatever you're having is fine. Anthony looked at her. The tiniest surprise. That's a lot of trust for someone you just met. I know. She paused. I used to trust easily. Something moved across his face at that. Not pity. Closer to recognition. He ordered sparkling water for both of them. The waiter disappeared. Would you treat them with kindness? And they looked at each other across a white tablecloth in a restaurant on the 40th floor of a building above a city that had no investment in how the next 2 hours went, and the whole room was either watching or pointedly pretending not to watch, and it was somehow still manageable, which surprised her, which told her something she wasn't quite ready to name yet. Tell me something interesting about yourself, he said. Not what I do for work. That tells me the least. She set down the menu. I write stories. What kind? Children's books. She said it, and then added, reflexively, automatically, before she could stop herself. None of them published yet. The qualifier came out like a disclaimer at the bottom of a contract, like she was preemptively apologizing for the size of the dream. Anthony looked at her for a moment. You said that like it needs an apology attached. She didn't answer right away. You smiled when you said children's books, right before the qualifier. For about half a second, he leaned back slightly. People smile like that at the things they actually love. The noise of the restaurant seemed to drop a register, not go quiet, just drop. Like someone had reached over and turned the ambient sound down 2 notches. Nobody had noticed that. Not the smile, not the half second of it, not what it meant. Not in the way he just described, accurately, to her face, on the first night they'd ever been in the same room. She looked at him. What do you write about? Right now I'm working on a story about an elephant who can't reach the stars. Because his trunk isn't long enough? Because there's too much distance. But he keeps trying. Does he make it? Would you treat them with kindness? She considered the question the way she considered it every time she was deep in a revision session at midnight, and the story refused to go where she pushed it. I don't know yet. He might have to find something else worth reaching for. Or the stars move, Anthony said. She looked at him. Stars do that, he said. Move toward things, planets, gravity, whatever. It's called proper motion. You know about stars. I know a little about everything. Occupational requirement. He said it without pride. Just information. Structural engineer. The physics bleeds into other things. She liked that. The bleeding. The way he described knowledge like it didn't stay in its lane. Marcus had kept everything in its lane. His job in one drawer, his family in another, his assessment of her in a third drawer that he opened selectively, with purpose, when he wanted her to feel a particular way. She did not say any of this. She said, my grandmother taught me to make everything into something else. Rainy days were sea voyages. A broken umbrella was a pirate ship. A cardboard box was a castle. A castle. She stopped. How did you know? It's always a castle. She laughed. Not the laugh she'd been with kindness. Not the laugh she'd been deploying all week in the various social situations she'd navigated, with the professional competence of someone who had learned to perform ease without experiencing it. This was her actual laugh. Shorter and less polished and more real. At the corner table, Harold Reed lowered his phone 2 inches. He was not getting what he came for. He had been watching for 11 minutes now, and Anthony Wilson had not done the thing. Had not found the excuse, had not made the face, had not conducted the apologetic retreat that Harold had mentally storyboarded over 2 weeks, had revised and improved over 2 weeks, had started constructing the punchline for over 2 weeks. He had his angle picked out. He had the caption ready for the group chat. He had 43% battery left, which should have been more than sufficient. Anthony was laughing now too. Harold put the phone down on the table, without quite realizing he'd done it. Beside him, Monica Bryant had gone very still, in the particular way of someone who is revising their understanding of a situation in real time. Lorraine Mitchell, would you treat them with kindness, who had been sipping her wine with the detachment of someone who had agreed to come out and was now wishing she had said no, set down her glass and looked at the couple across the room and said nothing. Would you treat them with kindness? Because there was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm what she was already thinking. What she was already thinking was that they had made a serious mistake. She had thought that before tonight. She had thought it when Harold first floated the idea in the elevator, his voice low and conspiratorial, his whole energy the energy of a man who had just discovered something that was going to be very funny and wanted witnesses. She had thought it when Monica had nodded and started working out the logistics. Which restaurant, which angle could they get a table with line of sight? She had thought it when she with kindness. She had thought it when she agreed to come and then hated herself for agreeing and showed up anyway because she had told herself it wasn't her problem. She was watching Anthony lean forward across the table to say something she couldn't hear, and you'd treat them with kindness. She was watching Vanessa listen with the attention of someone who hasn't been properly listened to in a long time and knows exactly what it feels like when someone finally does. And Lorraine thought, we should leave. We should get up right now and leave, and tomorrow I should walk into that HR office and… She didn't finish the thought. Not yet. Back at the table, a small child was walking past Vanessa's chair, maybe 4 or 5, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, with the casual grip of a child who has never once worried about dropping things and doesn't intend to start. The rabbit fell, right beside Vanessa's chair, the small thump of soft, stuffed weight hitting the floor between table legs and ambient foot traffic, where it could very easily be stepped on or forgotten or carried away on the sole of someone's shoe. Vanessa picked it up before the child had taken 2 more steps. Hey. Her voice was gentle, but not the condescending gentle people use with children. The kind you'd use with anyone. You almost left someone behind. The child turned around, looked at the rabbit, looked at Vanessa. That's Captain Fluffy. Captain Fluffy sounds like he's seen some things. He's afraid of the dark. The child hugged the rabbit with both arms now, but he's brave in the daytime. That's all you need to be, Vanessa said. Brave enough for the part of the day you're in. The child thought about this with the seriousness that children give to things adults have stopped thinking hard enough about. Then nodded. Then ran back toward a table 2 rows away, where 2 adults looked up and saw the rabbit in hand and exhaled. Anthony had watched the whole thing without moving. He noticed that she had not changed her voice for the child, had not pitched it up, or stretched her vowels, or deployed the special register. Most adults use that announces I am now speaking to someone smaller than me. She had just spoken, at the same register, with the same weight, as if the child's concern about Captain Fluffy was as valid as anything else happening in the room that night. Which it was. He thought about his father. He didn't try to. The thought just arrived, the way his father's memory arrived sometimes, quietly and without warning, in the middle of things that had nothing to do with him. His father, Wayne Wilson, who had spent the last 5 years of his life in a hospital room off and on, and who had never once asked anyone to change their voice for him either. Would you treat them with kindness? Who had a habit of asking the nurses their names and what neighborhood they'd grown up in and whether they liked the job or just needed it. Who had taught Anthony, by example and never by statement, that the size of the person in front of you was not a factor in the quality of the attention you owed them. Anthony had never told his father that. Never said, I learned that from you, the attention thing. The way you made people feel like what they were saying mattered as much as anything you had to say. He had intended to. He had composed the sentence in his head during the 3rd hospital stay, the serious one, the one that had lasted 11 weeks and restructured everything. He had composed it and set it aside for a better moment, and the better moment had not arrived before the kind of moment arrived that ends all subsequent moments. He still had the sentence. He just had nobody to say it to. You do that a lot? He had not planned to ask. It came out without announcement. Vanessa looked up from adjusting her napkin. Do what? Talk to people as if what they're worried about matters. She was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet. Considering quiet. My grandmother, she said, used to say that everyone is carrying something you can't see, even the people who look the most put together. Especially those people. She smoothed the napkin. I think I just assume everyone's Captain Fluffy is real. The waiter arrived with the sparkling water, set the glasses down, asked about appetizers. They ordered something. Anthony didn't remember afterward what exactly. Would you treat them with kindness? Because he was still thinking about the sentence he'd been carrying since 2019 and the woman across the table from him who apparently walked around, assuming the invisible weight of strangers was worth acknowledging. What made you start writing children's books specifically? He asked. Vanessa wrapped both hands around her water glass. I watched my grandmother take ordinary things and turn them into something my 8-year-old brain could survive. She didn't have money. She didn't have a lot of resources. What she had was imagination and the specific willingness to use it. She looked at the glass. I want to write books that do that reach the kid who just lost something and needs to believe the world still has space for them. Have you lost something? She looked up at him. You said the kid who just lost something. Not a kid who's adventurous, not a curious kid. Lost. She held his gaze for a beat longer than felt safe. My grandmother died when I was 22. And I started writing 6 weeks later, and I haven't stopped. Would you treat them with kindness? She said it with the way people talk about things they've lived with long enough that the raw edge has become familiar. Some things don't stop making you who you are, just because you've technically moved past them. Anthony nodded, slow and deliberate, like a man who wasn't nodding to fill space. My father got sick when I was 31, he said. The sentence had a different weight coming out of his mouth than it had living in his chest. It went on for 5 years, and I kept thinking I had more time to say certain things, and then I didn't. He looked at the city lights outside the window. I design buildings. I think about structural integrity all day, load-bearing. What holds? What doesn't? And the one structural thing I should have been paying attention to, I kept putting in the queue. What would you have said? He thought about it. For real. That he taught me the most important thing I know about how to be in a room with people, and I never once told him that. Silence. Not the silence of two people who have run out of things to say. The other kind. The rarer kind. The kind that settles between people when something has been said that the room needs a moment to absorb. At the corner table, Lorraine Mitchell was no longer looking at Harold. She was looking at the window behind Anthony and Vanessa's table, at the city spread them with kindness. At the city spread out below them, and she was thinking about a version of this evening in which she had spoken up in the elevator, when Harold first said his plan with that particular gleam in his voice. She was thinking about how many moments she had not spoken up in, how many times she had been in the elevator, metaphorically, and let the gleam go unremarked. Would you treat them with kindness? And she was thinking that the woman across the room in the burgundy dress had come here tonight, not knowing any of what was waiting for her, had come here having already talked herself out of it multiple times, and then talked herself back in, and was now treat them with kindness, and was now sitting across from someone and having the kind of conversation that doesn't happen if you decide to stay home. Monica Bryant reached over and put her hand over Harold's phone. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Stop," she said. "Quiet." He pulled the phone back. Not because Monica told him to. He pulled it back because something in his body was becoming uncomfortable with what his brain was still trying to frame as a prank, and his body was older and smarter than his brain about certain things, and it was sending him a very clear signal that this was not the thing he thought it was. The appetizers arrived. Vanessa talked about her daughter without planning to, the way you talk about someone who is woven into every other thought, whether you mean them to be there or not. Her name was Stephanie with kindness. She was 19, she was studying communications and had views about everything, and was wrong about fewer things than Vanessa was comfortable admitting. She sounds like someone who asks the inconvenient questions, Anthony said. She asked me why I was still apologizing to a man who hadn't been in our apartment for 2 years. He didn't ask the follow-up, didn't pull the thread. She was grateful for that, for the restraint of a person who understood that some threads are offered as information and not as invitations. "I have a nephew like that," he said. "Stephen's kid, 14 years old, and he will look you in the eye and say the thing everyone in the room was thinking and nobody wanted to be the one to say." He shook his head. "It's either going to take him very far or get him in constant trouble. Probably both. Definitely both. Would you treat them with kindness?" The main course arrived, and with it something that had not been there at the beginning of the evening, something that does not have a proper name, and usually you only recognize it in retrospect. The sense that a conversation has moved past the surface negotiation stage and arrived somewhere more honest, where what you say is actually what you mean, where the editing happens less. They were in that place. Vanessa knew it because she had stopped monitoring her hands. At some point, them with kindness. At some point in the last 45 minutes, she had stopped track where her hands were and what they were doing, and whether her posture communicated the right things, and they had just become her hands, doing the ordinary things hands do at dinner, reaching for a glass, gesturing lightly when a sentence required it, resting on the table between thoughts. She hadn't noticed when that happened. She noticed now. The dessert menus arrived. She looked at hers for a moment and started to set it aside the way she always did, the quiet automatic no thank you that she had stopped thinking of as a choice and started thinking of as a fact of her dinner experience, like the check comes at the end or the water gets refilled. Anthony watched her set it down. You didn't look at it. I don't usually do dessert. Why not? It was a simple question. He asked it the way you ask what time it is. Just a question. She looked at him. Something shifted in her chest, a small lateral movement, like furniture being rearranged. My ex-husband, she said, used to track what I ate, not loudly, not in a way that would be obvious to someone watching from the outside. Just. She paused. He had a way of looking at a dessert menu that communicated an entire opinion without saying a word. Anthony was quiet. After enough years of that, you stop wanting dessert. You think you've decided you don't want it. But you haven't decided anything. You've just absorbed someone else's preference until it feels like your own. He picked up the dessert menu. He studied it for a moment with the seriousness of a man reviewing a structural report. Then he looked up and caught the waiter's eye. 2 slices of the salted caramel cheesecake. She looked at him. I only ordered 1 slice, she said carefully. The second one's mine. You can have some if you want. He set the menu at the edge of the table for the waiter to collect. Nobody has to earn dessert. That's not a rule. That's a thing someone made up and other people started repeating until it felt like gravity. She stared at him. He was not performing largesse. He was not making a point. He said it the way you say the things you actually believe. Casually. Because they are simply true to you, and you haven't thought of them as being worth emphasis. They're just how things are. The waiter came and went. And Vanessa Carter, who had written 3 different versions of No, and been talked back in by her 19-year-old daughter, and had changed dresses 3 times, and had sat alone at a table in a restaurant on the 40th floor, listening to the kind of laughter that means you are the punchline, picked up the dessert menu and looked at it properly for the first time. She ordered the lemon tart. Not because told her to, because she wanted to. Would you treat them with kindness? Because somewhere in the last 90 minutes, the voice that sounded like Marcus's voice had gotten quieter. Not gone, not cancelled, just quieter. The way a radio station loses signal when you drive far enough from the tower. It didn't disappear, but she could hear the other things now. At the corner table, Harold Reed had put his phone away and was staring into his glass. Lorraine Mitchell had not said, "I told you so." She had not said anything. But she had stopped being at the corner table in the way that people stop being present in a room when their mind has gone somewhere else. She was in the elevator. She was in every elevator. She was thinking about the woman at that table who had come here, in spite of every reason not to. And she was thinking, someone should have said something before tonight. She should have said something. Monica was not looking at anyone. She had her hands, kindness. She had her hands folded on the table, and she was very deliberately not looking at Anthony and Vanessa, because looking at them meant having to stop revising the story she had told herself about why this had been a harmless idea. Harold said quietly, into his glass. It's going better than I thought it would. Lorraine looked at him. That's not the win you think it is, she said. He didn't answer, but the phone stayed in his pocket. The salted caramel cheesecake and the lemon tart arrived. Would you treat them with kindness? They ate for a few minutes in the comfortable silence of people who have stopped performing for each other and arrived at the simpler fact of being in the same place at the same time. The city continued below them, indifferent and constant, doing the things cities do, which is persist, regardless of what you're through inside them. The elephant, Anthony said. He had circled back to it, the way you circle back to the thing you haven't finished thinking about. In your book, does he know the stars have moved, or does he keep looking for them in the same spot? She thought about it, really thought. She had been working on this book for 8 months, and no one had asked her this question. Not her editor, who had rejected the first draft. Not the readers she'd workshopped it with. Not Stephanie, who read everything and commented on everything, but hadn't asked this. He's looking in the same spot, she said slowly, working it out as she spoke. The way you sometimes work out what you actually think, by saying it out loud to someone who is actually listening, because that's where he last saw them. And changing where you look means admitting they've moved. Anthony nodded, and admitting they've moved means admitting you might have to move too. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. That's the book. He smiled. It was not a large smile. It did not require accompaniment. It just arrived on his face and belonged there. And she thought briefly, involuntarily, that she had misjudged what tonight was going to be from start to finish. She had misjudged the dress. She had misjudged the conversation. She had misjudged the man sitting across from her, who had looked at her 3 different times and each time found the exact wrong thing to be looking at if the goal was to make her feel small. He kept finding the right thing. The children's books, the grandmother, the qualifier she didn't mean to add, the dessert menu she'd been setting aside for 7 years. She could hear Stephanie's voice in the back of her head. Not the words this time, just the tone. The told you so toneness. The told you so tone that Stephanie would absolutely deploy tomorrow when Vanessa got home and tried to describe this evening and couldn't quite fit it into any of the categories she'd prepared for it. Across the room, Lorraine Mitchell finally looked directly at Harold Reed and said, "We should leave. It's not Harold." She picked up her coat from the back of her chair. "We should go." He looked at the table across the room. "Would you treat them with kindness?" At Anthony leaning forward slightly to hear something Vanessa was saying. At Vanessa speaking with her hands in the uncalculated way of someone who has forgotten to be careful. Harold Reed had made a plan. He had it all worked out. The video, the caption, the group chat. He had 43% battery left on his phone. He left it in his pocket. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Monica was already standing. Only Lorraine paused. For one moment, at the edge of their table. "Would you treat them with kindness?" Looking across the room with the expression of someone who is making a note herself about something she needs to do differently. Then she turned and walked toward the elevator and didn't look back. The lemon tart was better than Vanessa had expected. She said so. Anthony said his cheesecake was adequate, which was the engineer's way of saying excellent. They split the second slice, the one he'd technically ordered for himself. "Would you treat them with kindness?" And the conversation moved through another register, the way music does when you're not paying attention to the transitions, from loss to structure to the specific way. Chicago winters feel different from anywhere else she'd lived, different fint in a way that requires a particular kind of stubbornness to love. By the time the check came, they had been at the table for 2 hours and 12 minutes. Neither of them had noticed. Harold Reed had been holding his phone under the table for 40 minutes. Not recording anymore. Just holding it. The way you hold something when you don't know what else to do with your hands, and putting it away feels like admitting something you're not ready to admit. The plan had been simple, clean. Harold was good at simple, clean plans. You find the angle, you set the stage, you press record, and let human nature do the rest. Human nature, in Harold's experience, was as extremely reliable. People did the predictable thing, the comfortable thing, the thing that required the least courage and delivered the most social cover. Harold had built an entire reputation in that office on knowing exactly what people would do before they did it. He was the guy who saw things coming, who called it, who sent the screenshot to the group chat before the meeting was even over. He had not called this. Anthony Wilson was currently making Vanessa Carter laugh for the 4th time. Not politely, actually. And Harold was sitting 12 feet away watching the plan he had spent 2 weeks constructing dissolve like sugar in hot water. And the worst part, the part he couldn't quite look at directly, was that the thing replacing it was better, was genuinely better, was the kind of thing you don't manufacture and can't fake. And Harold knew the difference because he had tried to manufacture it plenty of times, and it always came out slightly wrong, slightly off the frequency, like a cover song that hits all the notes but misses the feeling. Monica wasn't looking at the table anymore. She had turned her chair 3 degrees toward the window. Small adjustment, significant. Lorraine had gone quiet in a way that said everything. Then Harold did the thing he had promised himself he wouldn't do, the thing his second glass of Merlot had been quietly lobbying for. Since the entrees arrived, he stood up, not with a plan, without one, which was worse. The words came out before his brain had finished drafting them. "Thrill the nobody thought you'd actually stay, Anthony." And just like that, every table within earshot went still. Not all at once. In a ripple. The couple to the left first, then the foretop behind them, then the family near the window who had been arguing pleasantly about dessert. The ripple moved outward from Harold's table and kept going until it reached the walls and had nowhere else to go and came back changed. Vanessa did not move. She sat very still, in the way of someone whose body knows something bad has happened before the mind has finished processing the specifics. Her hands, which had been easy and unguarded for the last 90 minutes, relocated themselves to her lap, underneath the tablecloth. Gone. She turned and looked at Harold for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Anthony. You know him. Anthony was already standing, partially, pushing his chair back. Harold, no, seriously. Harold spread his hands in the gesture of a man trying to look reasonable in a situation he had personally made unreasonable. Everyone at the office bet you'd be out the door in 10 minutes. I'm saying you proved us wrong. Monica said Harold. Sit down. Low. Tight. The voice of someone watching a car roll toward a wall in slow motion. But Harold had the particular momentum of someone who has gone past the point of stopping easily. The Merlot had not helped. Would you treat them with kindness? Neither had the 40 minutes of watching something happen that was supposed to go differently. He was uncomfortable and discomfort, for Harold had always metabolized as noise. Vanessa said, was this arranged? Not a question. The cadence of a question without the uncertainty of one. The cadence of someone who already knows and is giving the room one final chance to tell the truth before she stops waiting for it. Anthony looked at her. I didn't know about it, whatever this is. I swear to you I didn't know. She studied his face, the same way she had studied it at the beginning of the evening when he first walked up to her table, looking for the recalibration, the micro-adjustment, the tell. His face was doing nothing that looked like a lie, but it was also doing nothing that could fix this. And then Lorraine Mitchell stood up. She didn't plan it. You could see that she didn't plan it because she was already standing before her expression had settled into anything intentional. She just stood, like the body making a decision the mind was still catching up to. She walked to Vanessa's table, not fast, deliberately. My name is Lorraine. I work with Anthony. She stopped. Let that land. I'm so sorry, before anything else. That's the first thing. She looked at Vanessa directly, not at Anthony, not at Harold, specifically at Vanessa. This wasn't supposed to be a real blind date. The room had gone so quiet that the jazz pianist in the far corner was audible for the first time all evening. Vanessa's voice, when it came, was almost conversational. I'm sorry. What? It was set up as. Lorraine stopped. Started again. There was no good word for it. There was not a word that made it smaller than it was, as a joke. They thought Anthony would walk in, see you and leave. Harold was recording it. The quiet in the room deepened, past regular quiet, into the quality of quiet that a room achieves when everyone in it is collectively holding something they don't know how to put down. Harold made a sound. Not words. A sound that was trying to become words and couldn't quite get there. Monica had sat back down. Hard. Like her legs had made the decision without consulting her. Vanessa turned to Anthony. She wasn't crying. She didn't look like she was about to cry. She looked like someone who had just been handed information she was in the process of fitting into the architecture of everything else she already knew. And the fitting was not going well, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. You knew all of this? I didn't know any of it. His voice was quiet, but it had weight to it. The weight of someone telling the truth about something that cost them to say. I knew something felt wrong when I got to the restaurant. The way Harold and Monica were already there. The way Harold's phone was positioned. But I didn't know the specifics. I promise you I didn't. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the tablecloth, at the lemon tart plate they had pushed to the side, at the second cheesecake slice mostly gone. The one he had ordered so she could have some, if she wanted, without making it about permission. I spent an hour, she said, talking myself into coming here. Her voice was steady. That was the thing about it. It was completely steady, which was a different kind of devastating than if it had shaken, because the steadiness said, this is not a surprise. Said I have calibrated for this. Said my body knew to expect it, even when my mind was trying not to. She picked up her clutch from beside her chair, and pushed back from the table and stood, not rushed, measured. Each movement deliberate in the way of someone who is focusing on the physical, because the alternative is losing hold of something she needs to keep. Thank you for the dinner, she said, to no one specifically and everyone generally. Have a good night. And she walked toward the elevator. Anthony was on his feet immediately. Not chasing, following. There's a difference. Chasing is about catching. Following is about not letting someone walk away believing something that isn't true. The restaurant did not return to normal after she left. It stayed in the suspended state Harold had put it in. That collective held breath, and nobody reached for their forks, and nobody resumed their conversations. Because some moments install themselves in the room, and the room doesn't know how to uninstall them. The elevator area was small. A foyer outside the main dining room. 2 elevator doors. A mirror on one wall that caught the light from the restaurant in amber smears. Vanessa was standing at the elevator bay with her back to him. Her shoulders were very straight. The kind of straight that costs something to maintain. He stopped a few feet behind her. She said, "You don't have to do this." Do what? The explanation. The apology on their behalf. The part where you convince me it wasn't what it looked like. I'm not going to tell you it wasn't what it looked like, Anthony said. It was exactly what it looked like. I can't change that. The elevator didn't come, which was probably good. She hadn't pressed the button. I have a question, she said, and I need you to answer it without editing it first. Okay. A pause. Long enough that he thought she might not ask it. Long enough to understand that she was assembling courage for something, which struck him because from the outside she didn't look like someone who needed to assemble anything. She looked self-contained. She looked like someone who had been self-contained for a very long time. When you first saw me, she said, what did you actually think? Not a question. Not inflected upward at the end. A sentence that required an answer. He could hear the jazz from the restaurant. Faint. Something with a long, slow melody. He could hear the low hum of the elevator system inside the shaft. He could hear himself breathe. He did not reach for an answer that would serve him well. He reached for the true one, which was also the more frightening one, and he said it without softening the edges. I thought you looked like someone who was waiting for something bad to happen. She turned around. Not all at once. The way a building settles, a gradual rotation until she was facing him. Not your size, he said. Not your dress. Not anything you were trying to manage or hide or present. You look terrified in the specific way of someone who has been through something and hasn't finished recovering and showed up anyway. He paused. And I thought, whoever taught her to expect the worst from a room full of strangers, that person did serious damage. She looked at him for a long time. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Neither of them moved. The doors closed again. I almost didn't come tonight, she said. The steadiness was them with kindness. The steadiness was still there in her voice, but something underneath it had shifted, like a changing direction below a surface that looks the same. I wrote 3 different texts declining and deleted all of them. My daughter was the reason I came. She's 19 and she said something that I can't argue with logically, which is the most infuriating kind of thing to be said. A pause. She said, I always write characters who are brave enough to walk through the door. She wanted to see me do it. Anthony said, she sounds right. She usually is. Vanessa exhaled. Something in her shoulders changed. Not a collapse. A redistribution. Like setting down a bag you've been carrying and not putting it back on. Just setting it down for a moment to see what happens. I don't know what to do with this evening. You don't have to do anything with it tonight. What would you have done if you'd been in my position? He thought about it, genuinely. I'd like to say I would have walked back in with my head up. But I don't know. I know what my father would have done. He would have walked back in and asked the waiter for a fresh fork and ordered another dessert. He looked at his hands. He always thought staying was the braver thing. She was watching him. Your father sounds like someone worth knowing. He was. The word did its quiet work in the space between them. Inside the restaurant, Raymond Harris had been sitting with his wife Teresa at their table by the window. For the last 40 years of evenings they had spent in restaurants across Chicago. Would you treat them with kindness? And he had watched the whole thing unfold with the particular attention of someone who has lived long enough to understand exactly what he was looking at. He was 70 years old, and he had the kind of stillness that only comes from having been in motion for a very long time. He looked at Harold Reed. Harold was sitting at his table, with the posture of a man who has had the floor removed from beneath him and is still waiting to land. Raymond stood up. Teresa put her hand on his arm. Not to stop him. She knew better than to try to stop him when he stood up with that expression. She put her hand on his arm the way you place a hand on something to say, "I'm here. I see what you're doing. Go ahead." He walked across the restaurant to Harold's table, not with anger. Raymond Harris had made peace with anger a long time ago, had learned that it was expensive and rarely bought what it advertised. What he had instead was something quieter and considerably heavier. He stood at the edge of Harold's table and waited until Harold looked up. "My wife," Raymond said, "lost a pregnancy at 28. She had to walk into a hospital waiting room, where there were people who had opinions about her body that they had not been asked for and did not hesitate to share." He paused. Let that sentence be what it was. She didn't hear what they said, or she heard and kept it from me because she knew what I would do. He looked at Harold steadily. I wasn't able to protect her from that moment. That's something I have carried for 47 years. Not because I could have done something. Because I couldn't. Harold did not speak. "You don't know," Raymond said, "what that woman is carrying. You looked at her from across a room and decided she was a setup. You don't know what it cost her to be in that chair." He glanced toward the elevator, the outdoor foyer, where the conversation was still happening in the amber-lit space beyond the restaurant doors. "I was married to the greatest woman I have ever had the privilege of knowing for 47 years. If I had listened to people who thought the way you do tonight, I would have missed every single one of those years." He turned and walked back to his table. Teresa had a glass of water waiting. She had not moved otherwise. She watched him sit down, and she took his hand on the tablecloth, and they did not speak, which was the communication of people who have been doing this long enough. Enough that the words are mostly optional. At Harold's table, nobody said anything. Monica was looking at the tablecloth. Lorraine was looking at the window. Harold was looking at the space Raymond had just been standing in, at the empty air where a 70-year-old man had delivered 47 years of marriage in 4 sentences and then walked away. In the elevator foyer, Vanessa and Anthony had reached the particular point in a conversation where both people know something is being decided, and neither wants to be the one who decides it wrong. "Come back in," Anthony said. Not a plea, not a command, an offer. The difference is everything. Not for them. Not to make a point, because the night doesn't have to end on their terms. She looked at the elevator button, still not pressed. "I don't know if I can sit in that room and act like, we can ask for the check and leave in 20 minutes if you want. But I don't want you to leave because of them. I want you to leave because you've decided you're ready to go." She looked at him. "The elephant," she said. He waited. "In my book, the elephant doesn't reach the stars in the first draft. He doesn't reach them in any draft so far, but every draft he stays until he can't see the sky anymore. He stays past the point that makes sense to stay." She looked at the elevator door, at her own reflection in the polished metal. "I think I've been writing about stubbornness and calling it hope. Maybe they're the same thing." She thought about that, and then she turned around and walked back into the restaurant. He followed. The room shifted when they walked back in. Not loudly. Just a reorientation, like a room of sunflowers tracking the light back when the source returns. A few people who had been watching their plates suddenly found reasons to look up. Raymond Harris smiled at Teresa. Small. Private. Vanessa did not look at Harold's table. She sat down at hers. She picked up the fork she had set aside when she left, and she looked at the remaining sliver of lemon tart and she took a bite. Anthony sat across from her. 20 minutes, he said. Or longer, she said. Depending. On what? On whether you have more to say about the elephant. He did, as it turned out. He had thoughts about the proper motion of stars that he had not finished. Would you treat them with kindness? Thoughts about how the thing you're looking for is often in a different position than where you last saw it, and that the looking in the wrong place isn't a failure, it's just phase 1. And she had counter-arguments. Good ones. Would you treat them with kindness? Because Vanessa Carter had been thinking about this elephant for 8 months and had counter-arguments for every position anyone had ever taken about what the ending should be. Would you treat them? And the counter-arguments were interesting in the way that only someone who cares deeply about something can make a counter-argument interesting. Monica Bryant looked at Harold. We should go. Harold did not argue. The fight had gone out of him somewhere around the time Raymond Harris had stood up. He flagged down with kindness. He flagged down a server and paid their portion of the bill and stood up and put on his jacket. And the jacket felt different than it had when he'd put it on 3 hours ago. Heavier. Not the jacket. Just everything in it. Lorraine stood also. She paused before she followed them out. She looked at the table where Anthony and Vanessa sat, at the resumed conversation, at the 2 plates with their second attempts at dessert. She thought about the elevator again. Every elevator she had ever been in, where she hadn't said the thing. She put on her coat and walked out. The restaurant continued. Darnell Cooper had been at the table by the east window all evening, working on a profile piece that was due Thursday and going nowhere useful, his laptop open, and ignored in favor of a glass of Tempranillo and the creeping suspicion that freelance journalism was a fever dream he had chosen when he was 23 and would have to eventually wake up from. He was 28, and the waking up had not happened yet, and tonight he was having feelings about it. He had watched the whole evening unfold from the vantage point of a man who both could not stop watching and was slightly ashamed of not being able to stop. He had watched Harold stand up and say the thing. He had watched Vanessa leave. He had watched Anthony follow. He had watched Raymond Harris cross the room. And he had watched the return. He had his phone out, not to record. He never recorded people without knowing he was going to. He had the phone out because the caption had written itself in his head around the time Vanessa walked back in and took a bite of her lemon tart, and it was a very simple caption, and he was fairly certain nobody was going to see it anyway because his account had 714 followers, most of whom were his former classmates from Northwestern who occasionally liked things out of obligation. He typed it. Read it. Read it again. I came here tonight because I stopped believing people are good. I was wrong. Would you treat them with kindness? Then he had attached the clip he had taken, the 40-second clip starting from the moment Anthony reached for Vanessa's chair before he sat down. The moment that had made Darnell set down his wine, because something about it had felt significant in the way that significant moments feel different from regular moments even before you understand why. He pressed post. Then he closed the app and went back to the profile piece that was due Thursday and had nothing to do with any of this. By the time Anthony drove Vanessa home that night, the city had thinned out the way Chicago thins after 11 on a weekday. The lakefront visible in quick glimpses between buildings. The sky doing the thing it does over a lit city, not dark, never truly dark, but a deep urban bruise of amber and violet that belongs to no hour in particular. They had stayed for another 45 minutes after the return. They had talked about the ending of the book, about his father, about the specific loneliness of being good at your job and not sure what else you were for, about Stephanie's paper on media framing and the way she had apparently argued that the entire construct of objectivity in journalism was a mythology that served people who were already centered by default, which Anthony thought with kindness, which Anthony thought was probably right and Vanessa thought was definitely right, but also going to be a difficult paper to grade. They had not talked about Harold, or Monica, or Raymond, or the 40 minutes the evening had been something other than what it was now. Not because those things weren't there, because both of them understood, without negotiating it, would you treat them with kindness, that the rest of the evening had earned the right to be the thing they were going to carry, and that everything before the return could wait in the lobby of the night for another time. He pulled up in front of her building on South King Drive and cut the engine. She looked at the building for a moment. 3rd floor. The light in her living room window was on, which meant Stephanie had left it on for her, which was a thing Stephanie did and denied doing. I had a good evening, she said, then slightly dry. Most of it was very good. She turned to look at him, studied, the same way she had studied him twice before. He was starting to understand that this was how she took the measure of things. Directly, without apology for the directness. I haven't talked to someone like that, she said. The trailing end of the sentence went somewhere she didn't fill in, didn't need to. He understood what the silence held. He understood because he had spent 3 years having competent dinners with perfectly fine people and going home with the mild relief of a man who had done the social thing and could now be alone with his own thoughts again. Tonight he had not been watching the clock. Tonight he had not organized the appropriate exit. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. The elephant. The part where he has to admit the stars have moved. Does he do it out loud in the story? Or does he just change where he's looking without explaining why? She thought about it. I haven't written that scene yet. Which version are you hoping for? The one that's harder to write, she said. The one where he says it out loud. He nodded. She opened the door. The night air came in cold the way November in Chicago is cold with intent. She stepped out and then turned back with her hand still on the door. Stephanie is going to ask me how it went. What are you going to tell her? She thought about it. A real pause. The kind that means the answer is actually being assembled and not retrieved. I'm going to tell her the world is strange and specific and I changed dresses 3 times for a reason I couldn't have predicted. She looked at him. And that I want to have another conversation. If that's something you want. He looked back. That's something I want. She closed the door. He watched her walk into the building, the glass lobby door swinging closed behind her, the elevator light at the far end activating. He sat for a moment with the engine off and the night settling around the car, and did not turn the key immediately. He was thinking about the sentence he had never said to his father, about proper motion, about how the thing you need is often still there, just not where you last left it, not at the same coordinates, requiring you to turn and look in a different direction than you've been looking. He turned the key. The engine started. He drove. The next morning arrived the way mornings arrive after evenings that have reconfigured something you didn't know needed reconfiguring, with too much light and too much clarity and the slightly disorienting awareness that yesterday was a different shape than today. Vanessa's phone started at 7:43 a.m. She had silenced it beforehand. She had not turned off notifications entirely, which she now understood was an error, because the notification counter at the top of her screen was displaying a number that did not look like a notification counter number. It looked like a formatting mistake. Like the app had glitched and stuck a comma in the wrong place. Stephanie appeared in the bedroom doorway in her northwestern hoodie, with a mug of coffee held out like an offering. Would you treat them with kindness? She had the expression of someone who had been up for a while and had been waiting for a reasonable hour to deliver information that was not going to be easy to deliver. So, Stephanie said. Vanessa took the coffee. Someone posted a video. Vanessa looked at her phone. Last night, a guy at the restaurant. He only had like 700 followers when he posted it, but then Stephanie gestured at Vanessa's phone. Then that happened. The video was 40 seconds long. It started with Anthony pulling out Vanessa's chair. It ended somewhere in the middle of them talking, both of them leaning forward slightly over the white tablecloth, the city lights making a frame in the window behind them. No audio worth capturing. Just 2 people in a restaurant. Just what it looked like from the outside when it was still the good version of the evening. The caption was 9 words. I came here tonight because I stopped believing people are good. I was wrong. Vanessa scrolled through the comments for 30 seconds and then stopped because 30 seconds was enough. Someone had written, "This man restored something in me I thought was gone." Someone else, the way he pulled out her chair. Not for show. Just because. Someone, find this woman and publish her books immediately. She put the phone face down on the bed. Mom. Stephanie sat down beside her on the bed, not bouncing. Carefully. Are you okay? I'm trying to figure out what okay means in this context. The video has 2 million views. I know. It had 400,000 when I woke up at 6. Stephanie. I'm just reporting facts. I know what you're doing. Stephanie was quiet for a moment. Then, your elephant. In the story. The one who can't reach the stars. She looked at her mother. What if the stars found a way to send the light down to him instead? Would that still count as reaching? Vanessa looked at her daughter. 19 years old. home for the weekend, with a media framing paper due Monday, and the absolute unearned confidence of someone who has been right about enough things that she has stopped worrying about being wrong. "When did you get like this?" Vanessa said. "You raised me." Vanessa's phone buzzed. Not a notification. A call. Unknown number, New York area code. She looked at it. Looked at Stephanie. Looked at the phone again. She answered. "Would you treat them with kindness?" The voice on the other end was brisk and warm in the specific combination of someone who makes many phone calls and has learned that the two qualities are not mutually exclusive. Her name was Patricia. She was a senior editor at a children's publishing house in New York. She said she had seen the video at 11 p.m. last night and immediately looked up whether Vanessa had any published work and found that she did not, and then stayed up until 1 a.m. thinking about why that was. "I'd like to read what you're working on," Patricia said. "No commitment from either of us. I just want to read it." Vanessa was standing in her kitchen now without knowing when she had walked there. Stephanie was in the doorway watching her the way you watch someone open something you wrapped. "I have 7 manuscripts," Vanessa said. "Various stages. Some of them have been through multiple drafts. Send me all of them." A pause. "The elephant one. Is that one of them?" Vanessa's grip on the phone tightened. "How did you know about the elephant?" "I didn't. I just guessed from your face in the video." Another pause. "People only make that face when they're carrying something they haven't been able to put down. Send me the elephant one first." After the call ended, Vanessa stood in her kitchen for a long moment. Stephanie was still in the doorway. The coffee was getting cold on the counter. "Well," Stephanie said. Vanessa looked at her daughter. "Well," she said back. And then she went to the closet where she kept the manuscripts. The ones she had printed and revised and reprinted and revised again, and eventually boxed, because looking at them reminded her of all the times she had sent them out, and all the times they had come back, and she pulled the box off the shelf and set it on the kitchen table, and opened it. 7 manuscripts. Paper-clipped. Annotated in her own handwriting in margins and between lines, the handwriting of someone who had been living inside these stories long enough that the notes were in 3 different pen colors from 3 different years. The elephant story was on top. She had put it on top 8 months ago when she last opened this box, without a clear reason. Just that it felt like the one most ready and also most frightening, which turned out to be the same feeling. She took it out of the box. She sat down at the kitchen table. In the chair where she had sat the night before when Stephanie had held up the burgundy dress and said that one with the absolute certainty of someone who had never once doubted her own eye. She started to read. 2 miles north, in the engineering firm's conference room on the 14th floor. Harold Reed was sitting across a table from the HR director and 2 people from legal and 1 person from operations who had not introduced herself and had not needed to because her presence made her function self-evident. The HR director, a man named Gerald, who had worked for this company for 20 years and had a file folder on the table that he had not opened yet, was looking at Harold with the expression of someone who had hoped, privately, that he would not be sitting in this specific meeting before his 2nd cup of coffee. "Walk me through last night," Gerald said. Harold walked him through it. He walked him through it in the version that made the most sense to tell, in a conference room at 9 a.m., with 2 people from legal watching him, which was not a dishonest version, but was a thinner version than the full truth. He described it as a setup that got out of hand, a joke that didn't land. Gerald opened the folder. Inside was a printed screenshot of Darnell Cooper's post, now at 2.6 million views. Gerald did not show Harold the screenshot. He looked at it himself for a moment and then placed it back in the folder. "The individual who posted this video," Gerald said, "did not identify your name or this company. However," he paused the way people pause when they are about to say something that the listener is not going to enjoy. "You are wearing a company-branded jacket in several frames. The logo is visible. We have already received 4 emails this morning." Harold looked at the table. From clients. Monica, who had arrived separately and was sitting 2 seats down from Harold, asked. Her voice was very controlled. "From journalists," Gerald said, "and 1 from a client." Lorraine Mitchell was not in the conference room. She had sent Gerald an email at 7:15 a.m. before the meeting was scheduled and had told him everything. The full version, not the thin one. She was at her desk, working. The work going poorly because her concentration was somewhere else, specifically in the conference room down the hall. But she was at her desk doing it because there was nothing else useful she could do at this point, and inaction made her worse. By 11 a.m., 3 things had happened in rapid sequence. Harold Reed received a termination notice. The stated reasons were the recording of a private individual without consent, the unauthorized use of a colleague's personal reservation information, and conduct unbecoming the company's stated values. Gerald delivered it without editorializing, without satisfaction, with the tone of a man who took no pleasure in the task, and also was not going to pretend it wasn't necessary. Monica Bryant received a formal written warning, a 3-month suspension from her management role, and a mandatory enrollment in a professional conduct program that the company had apparently had on the books for situations exactly like this one, which said something about how not unprecedented situations exactly like this one were. She accepted both without argument. She had arrived at the office that morning, already knowing that arguing was not available to her. She had given it up somewhere around the time Raymond Harris had said 47 years, and Lorraine Mitchell, who had told Gerald everything at 7:15 a.m. and had not been asked to attend the meeting, and had spent the morning at her desk with her concentration elsewhere, received a visit from Gerald himself, who walked to her desk mid-morning and leaned against the partition and said, "Quiet! You should have come to me before last night." Lorraine looked at her screen. "I know. But," he straightened up. "You came, that matters." She did not feel absolved by this. She did not think she should feel absolved by it. But she heard it, and she put it in the folder of things she was going to have to carry forward with her and figure out how to use correctly. Anthony heard about all of it secondhand, through a text from Gerald that was professional and brief. He was at a job site in the South Loop when the text came, standing in a partially finished corridor with a helmet on and a set of plans under his arm, and the particular kind of focus that construction sites demand, because inattention on a construction site has weight-bearing consequences. He read the text, replied with 2 words, then put his phone away and went back to the plans. But he was thinking about the lemon tart. Would you treat them with kindness? About the moment she had picked up the fork after they came back in, and had taken a bite with the precise deliberateness of someone making a decision they have made clearly and for themselves. He was thinking that this was what it looked like when someone stops apologizing for wanting the thing they want. He was also thinking that he had not said the thing about his father to anyone before last night. Not in 3 years. Not in any of the very fine dinners with the perfectly reasonable people. He had carried it in the drawer in the back of his brain with the Wentworth Project and the other unresolvable things. And last night, without planning to, he had taken it out and said it to a woman he had known for 2 hours, and it had not felt like oversharing. It had felt like it was supposed to be said. He didn't know what that meant yet. Would you treat them with kindness? He put on his helmet and walked back into the corridor with the plans and the structural assessments and the 11 things that needed to be resolved before Friday. And he was in the corridor for about 10 minutes before he took out his phone again and typed, "I heard some things happened this morning. I'm sorry for the part that came from my office. If you want to talk, I'm here. If you need a few days, I understand." He sent it. Then he went back to the plans. Vanessa was still at the kitchen table with the elephant manuscript when her phone lit up with Anthony's message. She read it once, set the phone down, read 4 more pages of the manuscript, then picked the phone back up and typed, "Thank you for telling me. I don't blame you for it." She paused, then added, "I read the whole manuscript this morning. The elephant gets an ending today." She set the phone down. She picked up her pen. She wrote the scene she had been circling for 8 months. The one where the elephant looks up, and the stars are gone from where he last saw them. Where he stays very still for a long moment, which in elephant time is longer than it sounds. Where he slowly, with the deliberateness of an animal that is large and does not do things halfway, turns his head to the east and sees them, not where he left them, not at the coordinates he had been looking, but there, still there, and he does not cry about the distance. He does not calculate whether reaching is possible. He stands in the space between where he is and where the light comes from, and he lifts his trunk toward it, not because he will touch it, but because the gesture is its own kind of answer to a question that has no other form. She read it back. Read it again. Then she picked up her phone and forwarded the manuscript to the New York number. 6 months is not a long time, except when it is. Would you treat them with kindness? Except when you measure it not in calendar pages, but in the accumulation of small ordinary moments that would not have existed without a single evening that could have gone entirely differently. 6 months of Tuesday phone calls that started as 10 minutes and became an hour without either of them noticing. 6 months of Stephanie sending Anthony unsolicited opinions about structural engineering via text because she had decided he was a useful sounding board for her thesis arguments, which had migrated from media framing to something about how built environments shape community identity. And Anthony had made the mistake of engaging thoughtfully with the first one, and now received approximately 4 a week. 6 months of the Elephant manuscript, going from Vanessa's kitchen table to Patricia's desk in New York, to 3 editorial meetings, to a contract that Vanessa signed on a Tuesday afternoon in February, while standing at her kitchen counter, still wearing her coat, because she had come straight home from the attorney's office and not yet taken it off. She took a photograph of the signature page, sent it to Stephanie, who called immediately and screamed at a volume that made Vanessa hold the phone away from her ear and smile at the ceiling. Then she sent the photograph to Anthony. His reply came 11 seconds later, which she knew because she was watching the screen. 3 words, "You did it." Then a pause. Then a 4th word, "Obviously." She laughed, at the kitchen counter in her coat, alone in the apartment. Laughed at the ceiling, the way you laugh when something has arrived that you stopped letting yourself want, and then started wanting again before you even realized you were doing it. The book was called The Elephant Who Couldn't Reach. It had a pub date in April, which was 5 months away when she signed the contract. Would you treat them with kindness? Which meant 5 months of cop edits and cover discussions and the particular anxiety of watching something that had lived only in your own head begin its process of becoming an object in the world that strangers would hold. Patricia, her editor, was precise and demanding and laughed at exactly the right moments during phone calls, which was the quality Vanessa had decided she most needed in an editor. Patricia had opinions about every paragraph, strong ones, delivered without apology and without cruelty, which turned out to be the combination that Vanessa responded to best. Having spent enough time in situations where she received opinions with cruelty and no opinions at all, and discovering that the honest middle was the thing she had always wanted, she started the 2nd book in January, The Elephant's Friend. A bird who had the opposite problem, could fly high enough to touch the stars, but was afraid of heights, which Stephanie had read in draft form and declared to be the most on-the-nose metaphor, her mother on-the-nose metamorpher her mother had ever committed to paper, which Vanessa took as confirmation she was on the right track. Anthony came to Bronzeville for the first time on a Friday in December. He brought pizza from a place in Hyde Park he'd heard about from a colleague, and a copy of The Phantom Tollbooth. Would you treat them with kindness? Which Vanessa had mentioned in passing on the phone 2 weeks earlier in the context of books her grandmother had read to her, and he had gone out and found a first edition, which was either very thoughtful or slightly alarming, and Vanessa had decided to receive it as the former. Stephanie opened the door. She looked at him the way she looked at everything she was assessing, which was directly and without the social lubrication of pretending she was doing anything other than assessing. She was 19, and she had her mother's eyes and her grandmother's precision and the particular unsentimental clarity of someone who loves fiercely and guards accordingly. You're Anthony. I hope so. Otherwise this pizza is going to the wrong apartment. She looked at the pizza box, looked at the book, looked back at his face with the expression of someone running a rapid internal calculation. Did my mother tell you about the Phantom Tollbooth, or did you research her? She mentioned it. When? 2 weeks ago. We were talking about your grandmother. Stephanie stepped back from the door. Not effusively, just opened it wider, which was, from Stephanie, essentially a standing ovation. He came in. Would you treat them with kindness? The apartment was the same apartment as the night of the blind date had surrounded Vanessa before she left, except that Anthony was in it now, and things look different when you are inside them rather than imagining them. The bookshelves were exactly as extensive as he had expected. The kitchen table had a manuscript on it. The smell of turpentine was faint from a back room where Vanessa did her illustrations, which was not a room he had seen yet, and felt like a room that would need to be earned. Vanessa came out of the kitchen in a sweatshirt and bare feet. Would you treat them with kindness? The version of herself that existed without audience management, and she looked at him standing in her living room, holding a pizza box and a first edition, and she felt the thing she had been feeling with increasing frequency since November. The thing that did not have a clean name, but sat in the chest like a key that had found its lock. You found it, she said. It wasn't hard. It was a first edition. I know what I said. Stephanie took the pizza box from him on the way to the kitchen. Over her shoulder, Mom told me you lost a game of Scrabble to a 14-year-old. He looked at Vanessa. You told her that. She asked how you were. I was going to tell that story differently. How differently? He thought about it. I was going to say I let him win. Stephanie called from the kitchen, did you? A pause? Honest pause? No. Stephanie laughed. It was Vanessa's laugh, the real one. Would you treat them with kindness? Dinner was pizza at the kitchen table, with the manuscript pushed to one side and Stephanie talking about her thesis and Anthony engaging with it seriously in the way that had apparently become a pattern. Would you treat them with kindness? Asking the kinds of questions that required her to think rather than just argue, which she found either deeply useful or deeply annoying, depending on the question. Would you treat them with kindness? And Vanessa watching the two of them go back and forth, with the slightly surreal of someone watching two things she loves occupy the same space for the first time. They played Scrabble after. Vanessa won. Significantly. She did not gloat because she did not need to, because her face was doing it for her. Anthony finished second. Stephanie finished third, and declared the scoring system corrupt, which was exactly what Anthony had expected her to say, based on 2 months of thesis texts. And he said so. Would you treat them with kindness? And she looked at him with the expression of someone who has been accurately read, and is not sure yet whether to be pleased or unnerved. Around 9 p.m., Stephanie announced she had reading to do and disappeared into her room. The door did not fully close. This was noted by Vanessa without comment. Anthony stayed for another hour. Would you treat them with kindness? They sat on the couch with the phantom toll booth on the coffee table between them and the city outside doing its November business, and the lamp making everything in the room amber and close. Stephanie approved, Vanessa said. She let me in the door. For Stephanie, that's a ceremony. He looked at the book. Your grandmother read that to you. Every summer. When I was 8, I made her read the chapter about the weatherman 17 times in 1 week. She read it every time. What did the weatherman do? He was very enthusiastic about weather. Not weather. Weather. He said it was fine not to know where you were going as long as you were on your way. She looked at the book. I didn't understand what that meant at 8. I thought it was just funny. She looked at the lamp. I understand it now in ways I didn't ask to. He looked at her. Not the studying look she used. Something quieter. I'm glad you went to the restaurant that night, he said. Not performing the sentiment, just stating it, the way he stated things that were simply true to him. I'm glad Stephanie talked you into it. She looked at him. So am I, she said, and meant all of it. March arrived with the particular Chicago rudeness of a month that promises spring and delivers ice. The copy edits on The Elephant Who Couldn't Reach were due to Patricia by the 15th, and Vanessa spent the first 2 weeks of the month at her kitchen table going through them, line by line, with the focused intensity she brought to things she cared about completely, which was its own kind of answer to the question of who she was. The cover came in on a Tuesday. She opened the file on her laptop and sat very still for a full minute. It was the elephant, standing in a field, his trunk extended upward, not toward the visible sky, but toward the light that the stars were casting down, the light that reached him even though the stars themselves were out of frame. The illustrator, a woman named Karen based in Detroit, had painted it in indigo and amber, and the specific shade of blue that exists in the sky between dark and dawn. Vanessa sent it to Patricia without commentary. Patricia wrote back in 40 seconds. This is what the book has always been. She sent it to Stephanie, who called and said, Mom, look at the elephant's face. Look at his face, Mom. She sent it to Anthony. He called. She picked up on the first ring. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then the light is coming down. I know. Not the elephant reaching up. The light coming down. Karen said that's what the ending gave her. The image of light moving toward the thing that couldn't move toward it. That's not what you wrote. That's what she read. Vanessa looked at the cover on her screen. I think she understood the book better than I did. Or you understood it exactly right, and you just needed someone else to show you what it looked like from the outside. She was looked for a moment, the good quiet. The kind that has texture. April arrived. The book arrived with it. Publication day was a Tuesday, which Vanessa had not requested and would not have chosen, because Tuesdays have no ceremony to them. Would you treat them with kindness? But Patricia had explained that Tuesday is actually when the industry moves, and Vanessa had decided to trust Patricia about industry things, the way Patricia trusted Vanessa about elephant things. The launch event was not in a bookstore. It was at the Lincoln Square branch of the Chicago Public Library. Would you treat them with kindness? Which Vanessa had requested specifically because she had brought Stephanie to this library every Saturday for 3 years when Stephanie was small, had sat with her in the children's section on the floor with the low shelves and the bright rugs, and had read to her from books that other people had made, and had quietly wanted, every single time, to make one herself. The library had set out chairs and a small podium and a table with copies of the book stacked in a way that made the cover visible, the indigo and amber, and the elephant with the light coming down. There were more people than Vanessa had expected. Not a crowd in the overwhelming sense. A crowd in the full sense. Parents with children. Teachers from 3 schools in the area who had gotten an early copy through the publisher. A reporter from the Tribune, Story, who had pitched the story not as a follow-up to the viral video, but as a story about a debut children's book author, which was the story Vanessa wanted told. Patricia had flown in from New York. She stood in the back with her coat over her arm, and the expression of someone who had made a bet and watched it pay. Stephanie was in the front row. She had come straight from class, still wearing her backpack because she had refused to be late for this, and had calculated that going home first was a risk she was unwilling to take. She was sitting with her backpack still on because she had not been willing to waste the 30 seconds of taking it off. This was the most Stephanie thing Vanessa had ever seen her do, and she loved her for it completely. Anthony was 3 seats down from Stephanie. He had left the job site at 4:30, which was early for him, and had changed in his car in the parking garage on Clark Street, because he had not wanted to take the time to go home. He was wearing the dark jacket. Not the same dark jacket from the restaurant, a different one, but the same quality of jacket, the jacket of a man who dresses for occasions, without making the dressing the occasion. Vanessa stood at the podium and looked at the room. She had prepared remarks, 2 pages, double-spaced, which she had written and revised 4 times, and then folded and put in her pocket. She did not take them out. She looked at the stack of books on the table, at the cover, the light coming down. I started writing this book 8 months before it became a book, she said, and I almost didn't finish it. Not because the story wasn't there, because I had stopped believing the story was worth finishing. She paused, looked at the room. Someone I know said something to me that I've been thinking about ever since. He said that the thing you're looking for is often still there, just not at the same coordinates, and that looking in the wrong place for a while isn't failure. It's just phase 1. She looked at Anthony. He was looking back at her with the expression of a man who recognizes his own words and is surprised by what they sound like when someone else carries them. The elephant in this book, she continued, can't reach the stars. He tries for a very with kindness. He tries for a very long time. He looks in the same place because that's where he last saw them. And changing where you look means admitting they've moved. And admitting they've moved means admitting you might have to move too. Would you treat them with kindness? She looked at the children in the front rows, the ones who had come with their parents, the ones who were sitting with the particular alertness of children who understand that someone is saying something real. He moves. Eventually. And the stars don't get closer. But the light does. She picked up a copy of the book. She started to read. She read the first chapter, and the last chapter, and the middle chapter that Patricia had fought hardest for. The one Vanessa had wanted to cut, and Patricia had refused to let her cut. And, reading it aloud in this room to these people, she understood why Patricia had been right. The chapter needed with kindness. The chapter needed to exist. It was the chapter where the elephant first realizes the stars have moved. The chapter she had spent 8 months circling. The one she had finally written in one session the morning after she sent Anthony's text back. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then a child in the third row said, "Does the elephant have a name?" Vanessa looked at her. Small girl, maybe 7, in a yellow jacket, sitting between 2 adults who were both trying not to cry about a children's book and succeeding poorly. "What do you think his name should be?" The girl thought about it. Serious. The way children think about names, with the understanding that names are consequential. "Walter," the girl said. "Walter." Vanessa said it. "Let it sit. I think that's exactly right." After the reading, there was a signing line. It moved slowly in the way signing lines move when people want to say something, but aren't sure how to say it quickly enough to be fair to the people behind them. Would you treat them with kindness? A woman who said her daughter had been through something hard and she'd been looking for the right book for 3 months. Would you treat them with kindness? A teacher who said she had already ordered 20 copies for her classroom and was expecting it to start arguments, which she meant as a compliment. A man about Raymond Harris's age who had come alone and held the book with both hands after she signed it and said simply, "My wife would have loved this," and then nodded once and stepped away. She watched him go. She thought about Raymond and Teresa, about the restaurant, about 47 years being delivered in 4 sentences to a man who had thought he was there to watch something cruel and had instead been made to understand what he had done. Would you treat them with kindness? After the line ended, Patricia materialized beside her with the efficiency of someone who has been waiting patiently for the right moment and has now identified it. "The second book," Patricia said. "I'm working on it. The Bird, Afraid of Heights." "That's going to be a longer conversation." Patricia handed her a card, which Vanessa already had, but the gesture was about something other than the card. "Call me Thursday. We have things to discuss." Then Patricia was gone. Coat over arm, out the library door, back to O'Hare and New York, and the rest of her Tuesday. Stephanie appeared at Vanessa's elbow, backpack finally removed, holding it by one strap. "Patricia is terrifying," Stephanie said. "Patricia is magnificent. Both things." Stephanie looked at the stack of books, diminished now but not depleted. "Mom, I know. No, I mean." Stephanie looked at her. "You did a thing tonight that you have been trying to do for 11 years, and I watched you do it, and I need you to know that I know that." Vanessa looked at her daughter, at the 19 years of her. At the woman she was already becoming, the seriousness and the humor and the precision and the love that ran through all of it, like a structural element you don't see but that holds everything up. She did not say the thing she was thinking because the thing she was thinking was too large for the of a library. At 8 p.m., with the chairs still being stacked by volunteers, she hugged her instead. Hard. The kind of hug that is trying to say everything the words can't hold. Stephanie hugged back. Then Anthony was there, on the other side of Stephanie, with the book in his hand, his copy, the one Stephanie had apparently grabbed and thrust at him, while Vanessa was talking to Patricia. Would you treat them with kindness? Because that was the kind of initiative Stephanie exercised when she decided something should happen. He looked at Vanessa. He had the expression of someone who has not decided what to say yet because everything that presents itself feels insufficient. "Walter," he said. The child named him. "I know. I heard." He looked at the book, at the cover. "I think Walter is correct." She laughed. Tired laugh. Good tired. The tired of a day that cost something real and paid it back with interest. They walked out of the library together into the April night. Chicago in April is not trustworthy. It had been 52 degrees at 4 p.m. and was now 41, and the wind off the lake was making its opinion known. Stephanie pulled her hoodie tighter. and delivered a brief but comprehensive assessment of Chicago weather that Vanessa had heard variations of for every April of Stephanie's life and still found funny. Would you treat them with kindness? They walked to a diner on Lincoln that was open late and had the kind of lighting that makes everyone look like they are having a good time, which in this case was not a photographic trick, but an accurate rendering of conditions on the ground. Would you coffee with kindness? They ordered coffee and pie, and Stephanie had strong feelings about the lemon meringue versus the pecan that she expressed without being asked, which was her standard operating mode. While Stephanie was in the restroom, Anthony looked at Vanessa across the table. She put on her backpack at 6 a.m., he said. She told me. She didn't want to be late. She would not have been able to live with herself if she'd been late. She loves you in a way that's almost architectural. He looked at the table, like the love is a thing you can lean against. Vanessa looked at him. He said things like this without warning, without build-up. Would you treat them with kindness? Just arrived at them and put them on the table, these precise, true observations, and then moved on as if he had not just handed her something she was going to think about for the next week. Your father taught you how to do that, she said. Do what? See the structure of things, not just the surface. He was quiet for a moment. She had come to understand his quiet. There were different kinds. This one was the kind where something was being considered before it was said. I talked to him last week, he said. She waited. At his grave. I go sometimes. He looked at his coffee. I said the thing I didn't say when he was alive. He picked up the spoon and set it down without using it. I told him he taught me the most important thing I know about being in a room with people, and I never told him, and I should have. She did not rush to fill what followed. It felt, he said, like sending a letter to an address that no longer exists, except that the sending still mattered, even if the arriving was uncertain. She looked at him. Would you treat them with kindness? At the 11 years he hadn't carried alone but had carried without the specific language for what it was he was carrying. Would you treat them with kindness? At the man who had pulled out a chair on a November evening for a woman he didn't know in a restaurant full of people who expected him to do something else, and had done it, not because he was performing anything, but because his father, who had been gone for 5 years, had taught him without saying so, that this was the only way worth being. He would have liked the elephant, she said. He would have loved Walter. Would you treat them with kindness? Stephanie came back from the restroom and looked at both of them, and made the assessment that something had happened in her absence, and decided, with the wisdom of a 19-year-old who knows when to stay out of something, that she was going to have very strong opinions about the pecan pie. Would you treat them with kindness? 8 months after the book came out, Anthony called Vanessa on a Thursday morning and asked her if she had anything scheduled for Saturday. She had a school visit in the morning. Lincoln Park Elementary, a 3rd grade class that had been reading the book together, and had questions that their teacher had promised were substantial. After that she was free. After the school visit, he said. What are you planning? Not telling you, Anthony. You'll find out Saturday. She had learned, in the time since November of the previous year, that Anthony Wilson's surprises were thoughtful in the specific way of a structural engineer's surprises, which meant they were load-bearing. They held weight. They were not decorative. So she said, okay. Saturday morning was October, proper October, the city doing its amber and rust thing along the parkways. Lakeshore Drive banked with color. The sky the specific shade of blue that only exists in October over the Midwest. A blue that has never been successfully reproduced in paint or photograph, and exists only in the actual sky, in the actual moment. The school visit was 32 children in a 3rd grade classroom in Lincoln Park, which their teacher, Ms. Anita, had decorated with drawings of elephants that the children had made, each one labeled with a name they had chosen for Walter's version in their heads, which meant there was a Walter, obviously, but also a Charlie and a Marcus and a Big Steve, and one that said simply him, in a handwriting that suggested philosophical depths unusual for an 8-year-old. She read the chapter, where Walter first looks east, where he finds the stars not at the coordinates he'd been using but somewhere new, somewhere requiring the admission she had spent 8 months writing him toward. The room was the kind of quiet that a room only achieves when everyone in it is actually listening, not performing listening but doing it. even the child in the back, who had been picking at a loose thread on his sleeve every time she glanced up. When she finished, the smallest child in the class, a boy with glasses that were slightly too big for his face, raised his hand. "Does Walter ever get to actually touch a star?" Vanessa looked at him. Really looked. "What do you think?" The boy thought. Really thought. With the glasses too big and the hand still raised because he hadn't been given permission to put it down, and he was a rule follower, she could see that. "I think," the boy said slowly, "maybe touching isn't the whole point." She looked at him for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Elijah." She said it carefully, the way a word deserves to be said when it belongs to someone who just understood something important. "You're right. Touching isn't the whole point. Miss, would you treat them with kindness?" Anita, in the back, was pressing her fingers to her mouth with the expression of a teacher who has just watched one of her students arrive somewhere she's been trying to lead them for weeks. After the visit, Anthony was waiting outside on the sidewalk. Not in the car. On the sidewalk. Which meant whatever came next involved walking. He was holding a piece of paper folded into fourths. She looked at it. "What is that?" "You'll see." She unfolded it. It was a list. Written by hand in the clean, precise script of someone who thinks spatially, who draws plans for a living, for whom the arrangement of things on a page carries meaning. The items on the list were not decorated. They did not require decoration. Miniature golf at the course in Diversey. Ice cream at the place on Clark she had mentioned in October and he had written down. Walk along the lakefront. Sunset at Montrose Beach. At the bottom of the list, underlined once, no audience. No one else's plan. Just this. She read it twice. She looked up at him. "You wrote this down," she said. "I wanted to make sure I didn't forget anything. When did you write it?" He looked at the paper. "The morning after you told me you needed a few days." She stared at him. "That was almost a year ago." "I know. You've had this list for a year. I wanted to do it right." He said it the way he said things that were simply true to him. Without performance. Without the management of how the truth was going to be received. You deserved to have the evening you should have had the first time. Without the parts that weren't supposed to be there. She looked at the list again. The handwriting, the underline. The voice in her head that had been running on a loop for 7 years. The voice that sounded like her ex-husband's voice even though she hadn't heard his actual voice in nearly 3 years. Said nothing, not quieter. Absent. Gone from this moment, the way a radio station goes when you've driven far enough and there's simply no signal left. She folded the list back into fourths. Put it in her pocket, where it was going to live for a long time. "Miniature golf first," she said. They walked. The miniature treated them with kindness. The miniature golf course in Diversey was in the park where the city still had the municipal course, aging and charming and surrounded by the October trees doing their color work, and Vanessa beat Anthony on 5 of the 9 holes, which she announced without humility, and he accepted without complaint because the loss was accurate, and he was an engineer, and accurate results were something he had trained himself to receive without editorializing. The ice cream at the place on Clark was a chocolate and sea salt situation that she had described in October as the best thing she'd eaten in Lincoln Park since moving back to Chicago, and it was, which he was glad about, in the specific way of a person whose planning has landed. Would you treat them with kindness? They walked the lakefront from Diversey to Montrose as the afternoon went gold and then amber, and then the particular shade that exists in the last 20 minutes before the sun actually hits the water, the shade that makes everything it touches look like it is being seen for the last time, and simultaneously, like it has always looked exactly this way. At Montrose Beach, they found a bench that faced west and sat on it and watched the sun proceed toward the horizon at the pace it had been proceeding at since long before Chicago was here to watch it. She had the folded paper in her pocket. She could feel it through the fabric. "This evening," she said. "Yeah, it's better than the first one. It was always going to be." She looked at him. "Would you treat them with kindness?" At the 8 months of books and school visits and Tuesday phone calls and December pizza, and the night in February when she had signed her name on a contract at her kitchen counter, still wearing her coat. At the man who had written a list the morning after she'd asked for a Fiorese, and had held it for a year until the timing was what it was supposed to be. Elijah, she said. The kid from today? He said touching isn't the whole point. He's right. He's 8 years old. Doesn't make him wrong. She looked out at the lake. The sun was low now. The water was doing the thing Lake Michigan does at sunset in October, going from gray-green to copper in stages, the color moving toward the shore. I've been thinking, she said, about what I would have told myself a year ago. The version of me standing in front of the bathroom mirror in the burgundy dress about to get in a cab to a restaurant I had almost called and cancelled. What would you have said? She thought about it. The way she thought about the endings of her books, which was slowly and with full attention. I would have said, the evening is not going to be what you're bracing for. The evening is going to be harder than you're bracing for, and better than you're allowing yourself to hope for, and neither of those things is going to be the part that stays with you. She looked at the water. The part that stays with you is smaller. It's the moment someone notices the half-second where you smile, before you apologize for smiling. Anthony was quiet. That's what you're going to keep, she said. Not the restaurant or the drama or the video or the book deal that came out of it. The half-second. Because the half-second is what told you something was possible. The sun reached the water. It did the thing it always does, which is go quickly at the end, after taking its time with everything leading up to it, as if it's been patient long enough and has somewhere to be. The sky behind it went pink, then coral, then the deep blue that closes in from the east while the west is still glowing, the two colors meeting somewhere over the middle of the lake, in a gradation that has no official name. She looked at Anthony. He was already looking at her. Your father? She said. What do you think he would have made of this evening? He smiled. Small, private. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who is talking to a person who is not in the room. He would have had 3 questions, Anthony said. 1. Can she hold a conversation? 2. Does she make you laugh? 3. He paused. Does she look at you like you're still worth looking at after you've said the awkward true thing? She waited. He would have had the answers to all 3 by now, Anthony said. And he would have been very annoying about being right. She laughed, the real one. Short and less polished and more true. The lake held the last of the light for a few minutes after the sun was gone. The way it always did. The way water holds warmth longer than air, longer than land, longer than most things designed to hold it. It kept the color past the point that seemed reasonable, and then slowly, slowly let it go. They sat until it was fully dark and the park lights came on, and Chicago behind them resumed its indifferent luminous business, the thing it did every night regardless. Then you treat them with kindness, with the list folded in her pocket, and the sky above them doing the thing it does over a lit city, that amber and violet that belongs to no particular hour but is specific to this place, this latitude, this collection of buildings and water and people carrying things you can't see. The elephant doesn't touch the stars. Walter never touches them. But the light comes down. It crosses the distance that the trunk cannot. It arrives on the ground where he's standing, where he has always been standing, where he finally turned to look, and it is warm and it is real, and it reaches exactly as far as it needs to. That's not a consolation prize. That's not the second best ending. That is the ending. The one Vanessa wrote in one session the morning after she decided to stop writing around it. The one Karen, the illustrator, painted in indigo and amber. The one Elijah understood at 8 years old with glasses too big for his face. And a hand still raised because he was a rule follower. The light comes down. It always does.